The sun was just starting to peek over the Montana hills when Tom heard something unusual near his barn. He'd been ranching for over 20 years and he knew every sound his property made. This wasn't right. He grabbed his jacket and headed outside, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The morning air was cold and crisp, the way it always was in early spring. His horses were restless in the stable, shifting nervously in their stalls. That's when he saw her. A woman was collapsed near the fence, barely moving. Tom's heart jumped into his throat as he rushed over. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, and she looked terrible. Her clothes were ripped and dirty, her face was swollen with bruises, and dried blood streaked down from a cut above her eye. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Tom called out, slowing his approach when he saw her flinch. She tried to scramble backward, her eyes wide with terror. Her hands came up defensively, and that's when Tom noticed her wrists were bruised too, like someone had grabbed her hard. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just make it quick." Tom stopped dead in his tracks. His stomach turned. She thought he was going to hurt her. She expected it. No, he said quickly, holding his hands up where she could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you. This is my ranch. You're safe here." The woman stared at him, confusion mixing with the fear in her eyes. She was shaking badly. Whether from cold or shock or both, Tom couldn't tell. He slowly took off his hat and set it on the ground, then took a few steps back to give her space. "My name's Tom. I live here alone, just me and the horses. I'm going to help you, but I need to know you're okay with that." She didn't respond right away. Her breathing was shallow and quick. Tom could see she was trying to decide whether to trust him or run. "You're hurt," he said gently, "and you look like you've been walking for a long time. Whatever happened, whatever you're running from, it's not here. Nobody's going to hurt you on my property." A tear rolled down her cheek, cutting through the dirt on her face. "Promise?" she whispered. "I promise," Tom said, and he meant it with everything in him. She nodded slightly, and Tom carefully approached. When he got close enough, he could see just how bad her injuries really were. The bruises weren't fresh, maybe a day or two old, turning purple and yellow. There was dried blood on her scalp. Her left ankle was swollen. "Can you walk?" he asked. I don't know," she admitted. Tom knelt down beside her, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle her. "I'm going to help you stand, okay? We need to get you inside and call a doctor." She grabbed his arm suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong despite her condition. "No police," she said urgently. "Please, no police. They know people." Tom's jaw tightened. He didn't know who they were yet, but the fear in her voice told him everything he needed to know. Someone had done this to her, and she believed they had enough power to find her again. "All right," he said. "No police right now. But we're getting you to a doctor. That's not negotiable." He helped her to her feet, letting her lean heavily on him. She winced with every step, clearly in pain. The walk to his house, which usually took 2 minutes, took almost 10. Tom had to stop several times to let her catch her breath. Inside, he settled her on his couch and grabbed a blanket from the closet. She pulled it around herself tightly, still shaking. "I'm going to get you some water," Tom said. "And then I need to call Doc Patterson. He's a good man. Been the town doctor for 30 years. He won't say anything to anyone if I ask him not to." The woman nodded weakly. Tom noticed she kept glancing at the windows, like she expected someone to appear any second. In the kitchen, he filled a glass with water and pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking a little as he dialed. Doc Patterson answered on the third ring. "Doc, it's Tom Jensen. I need you to come out to my place right away. And Doc, bring your medical bag. This is serious." "What happened?" the doctor asked, his voice shifting to professional concern. "I found someone on my property. She's hurt bad. Looks like someone beat her pretty badly. And Doc, she's scared. Really scared. She doesn't want this reported." There was a pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Keep her warm and still." Tom brought the water back to the living room. The woman took it with trembling hands and sipped slowly. "What's your name?" Tom asked, settling into the chair across from her. She hesitated for a long moment. "Kelly," she finally said. "Kelly, the doctor's on his way. He's a good man, and he won't tell anyone you're here if you don't want him to. But I need to know, is someone looking for you?" Kelly's eyes filled with tears again. "Yes," she whispered. "And if they find me, they'll kill me this time." Tom leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then we won't let them find you," he said simply. "You're safe here, Kelly. I don't know what happened to you yet, but I can see someone hurt you bad. And I'm telling you right now, as long as you're on this property, nobody's going to touch you again. You don't understand, Kelly said, her voice breaking. They're powerful. They have money connections. I don't care who they are, Tom interrupted, his voice hard. I don't care how much money they have or who they know. What they did to you is wrong, and they're going to answer for it. Kelly stared at him, something like hope flickering in her exhausted eyes. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Tom thought about that for a moment. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I can see you've been through hell. Everyone deserves a safe place to land. They sat in silence until they heard a truck pulling up outside. Kelly tensed, but Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. That's just Doc Patterson, he said. Remember, he's here to help. The doctor came in carrying his worn leather medical bag. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes and a calm presence that immediately seemed to ease some of Kelly's tension. Hello there, Doc Patterson said gently. Tom called me. Mind if I take a look at those injuries? As the doctor began his examination, Tom stepped back and watched. Kelly flinched and gasped at certain touches, revealing just how much pain she was in. Doc Patterson worked carefully, his expression growing more grave with each injury he documented. Finally, he looked up at Tom. She needs to go to the hospital. She's got broken ribs, possible concussion, and that ankle needs x-rays. No hospitals, Kelly said firmly, despite the pain in her voice. Please, they'll find me there. Doc Patterson looked at Tom, who nodded slightly. The doctor sighed. All right. I can treat most of this here, but you need to rest. Complete rest. And if anything gets worse, we're going to the hospital whether you like it or not. Understood. Kelly nodded, relief washing over her face. As Doc Patterson worked, cleaning wounds and wrapping Kelly's ribs, Tom made a decision. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew enough. This woman had been hurt by people who thought they could get away with it. People who thought they were above consequences. They were wrong. And Tom was going to make sure they understood just how wrong they were. 3 days passed before Kelly was ready to talk about what happened. Tom didn't push. He'd set her up in his guest bedroom, made sure she had food and water, and checked on her regularly. Doc Patterson came by twice more to change bandages and make sure everything was healing right. On the third evening, Tom was making dinner when Kelly appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was moving better, though still slow and careful. The swelling in her face had gone down enough that he could see what she really looked like. She had determined eyes even with all she'd been through. Smells good, she said quietly. Just chicken soup, Tom replied. Nothing fancy. You hungry? Starving, actually. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Tom had learned that Kelly appreciated the quiet. She'd been jumpy those first couple days, waking up at every small sound, constantly checking the windows, but slowly she was starting to relax. I worked for the Dawson Construction Company, Kelly said suddenly, setting down her spoon. In Redemption Creek, about 40 miles from here. Tom nodded, encouraging her to continue but not interrupting. I was their bookkeeper. Had been for almost 3 years. Good job, decent pay. I thought I was lucky to have it. She laughed bitterly. Turns out I wasn't lucky at all. What happened? Tom asked gently. Kelly took a deep breath. About 2 months ago, I noticed something weird in the accounts. Money going out to contractors I'd never heard of. Big amounts, 50,000 here, 70,000 there. When I looked closer, I realized the contracts were fake. Made-up companies, fake addresses, the whole thing. Tom felt his hands tighten around his coffee mug. Money laundering. Exactly, Kelly said. And it wasn't small time. Over the past 5 years, they'd moved almost $3 million through these fake contracts. I started documenting everything, making copies of files. I knew I had to report it, but I wanted to make sure I had solid proof first. Smart, Tom said. Maybe too smart, Kelly replied. I made the mistake of talking to my supervisor about it. Robert Chen. He'd always seemed like a good guy, you know? Brought his kids by the office sometimes, talked about his family. I thought he'd want to know. She paused, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her ribs. He told me he'd look into it, said not to worry, that there was probably a reasonable explanation. But the next day, everything changed. The way people looked at me in the office. The cold shoulder at lunch. I knew something was wrong. Tom waited as Kelly gathered herself to continue. That Friday night, I was leaving work late. I'd been going through more files, finding more evidence. The parking lot was mostly empty. I got to my car and 3 men came out of nowhere. 2 of them grabbed me before I could even scream. Kelly's voice shook, but she kept going. They dragged me behind the building. Started hitting me, telling me I needed to learn to mind my own business. Said if I went to the police, if I told anyone what I knew, they'd make sure I disappeared for good. One of them said they'd burn my apartment down with me in it. Tom's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Did you recognize them? 2 of them worked at the company. Construction guys. The third one, I'd seen him before with the Dawson brothers. Their enforcer, I guess. The one who handles their dirty work. Kelly wrapped her arms around herself. They didn't just beat me. They wanted to scare me. Make sure I understood what would happen if I talked. How'd you get away? Tom asked. They threw me in the back of a truck. Drove for about an hour. Way out into the middle of nowhere. Dumped me on the side of some dirt road. It was dark, cold. They left me there, figuring I wouldn't make it through the night even if I did wake up. But you did, Tom said. Kelly nodded. I came to after a couple hours. Everything hurt so bad I could barely move. But I knew if I stayed there, I'd die. So I started walking. Didn't even know which direction I was going. Just kept putting one foot in front of the other. You walked 12 miles in that condition, Tom said, shaking his head in amazement. That takes serious strength. I was terrified, Kelly admitted. Every car I heard, every sound, I thought they were coming back to finish the job. When I finally saw your barn, I couldn't go any further. I thought maybe you'd call someone, and at least they'd find my body instead of leaving me out there. The silence that followed was heavy. Tom pushed back from the table and walked to the window, looking out at his land. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange. Do you still have the evidence? He asked. The files you copied? Kelly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. Everything's on here. Bank statements, fake contracts, email chains. It's all there. Tom turned back to her. Then we're going to use it. We're going to make sure the Dawson brothers pay for what they did to you. Tom, you don't understand, Kelly said desperately. These aren't just some small-time criminals. The Dawson brothers own half of Redemption Creek. They've got the mayor in their pocket, probably some of the police too. Their lawyer is the meanest guy in 3 counties. They'll bury us. Let them try, Tom said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. I've dealt with bullies before, Kelly. And the one thing I've learned is that bullies count on people being too scared to fight back. That's how they keep their power. This is different, Kelly insisted. They'll come after you too. I'm counting on it, Tom replied. He sat back down across from her. Listen to me. What they did to you is evil, plain and simple. They beat you, terrorized you, and left you to die. And you know what the worst part is? They think they're going to get away with it. They think you're either dead or too scared to do anything about it. Kelly's eyes were wet with tears. I am scared. I know you are, Tom said gently. And you've got every right to be. But you're also the bravest person I've met in a long time. You survived something that should have killed you. You walked 12 miles broken and bleeding because you refused to give up. That's not weakness, Kelly, that's strength. So what do? She asked. Tom thought for a moment. First, we need to talk to someone I trust. Sheriff Rodriguez over in Willow County. He's a good man, honest as they come. He won't be on the Dawson brothers' payroll. And then we build a case so strong, so airtight, that even their fancy lawyers and dirty cops can't make it go away. We find other people they've hurt. We document everything, and when the time is right, we bring them down so hard they never get back up. Kelly studied his face for a long moment. Why are you doing this? You could just let me stay here a few days, heal up, and send me on my way. Why risk everything? Tom was quiet, remembering something from years ago. His daughter, Amy. She'd been bullied in school, tormented by some older kids. She'd come home crying so many times, and Tom had told her to ignore them, to just keep her head down. He thought that was the right advice. Stay out of trouble. Don't make waves, Amy had taken his advice. She'd stayed quiet, kept her head down, and the bullying had gotten worse. By the time Tom realized how bad it really was, it was too late. Amy had stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The light had gone out of her eyes. She'd taken her own life when she was just 15 years old. Tom had never forgiven himself for telling her to stay quiet, for not standing up to those bullies and their parents, for choosing peace over protecting his daughter. He looked at Kelly, saw that same defeated look Amy had worn, and something hardened inside him. Because staying quiet never works, he said finally. Because people like the Dawson brothers keep hurting people because nobody stops them. And because what happened to you was wrong and someone needs to make it right. Kelly reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered. Tom nodded. Tomorrow we call Sheriff Rodriguez. Tonight you rest. You're going to need your strength for what comes next. As Kelly headed back to her room, Tom pulled out his phone and looked at the USB drive she'd left on the table. $3 million in stolen money, fake contracts, fraud, assault, attempted murder. The Dawson brothers had made a big mistake when they left Kelly alive. And Tom was going to make sure it was the last mistake they ever made. He made himself a promise right there in his quiet kitchen. They would pay for this. Every single one of them. And he'd make sure Kelly got to see justice done. Sheriff Rodriguez arrived at Tom's ranch 2 days later, driving an unmarked car instead of his usual patrol vehicle. He was a solid man in his 50s with gray streaks in his dark hair and eyes that didn't miss much. Tom had known Carlos Rodriguez for almost 15 years. They'd met at a community meeting about water rights, and Tom had been impressed by the sheriff's fairness. Carlos didn't care who you were or how much money you had. He cared about doing what was right. Kelly was nervous when Carlos walked into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, ready to run if she needed to. Kelly, this is Sheriff Rodriguez, Tom said. Carlos, this is Kelly. She's the one I told you about. Carlos sat down slowly, keeping his distance. Miss Kelly, Tom told me a little bit about your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you if you're comfortable sharing. Kelly glanced at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. Then she told her story again, starting from the moment she discovered the fake contracts to waking up on that dirt road. Her voice shook in places, but she got through it. When she finished, Carlos was quiet for a moment. May I see the evidence you mentioned? Kelly handed him the USB drive. Carlos pulled out his laptop and spent the next hour going through the files. His expression grew darker with each document he opened. This is substantial, he finally said. Bank records, email chains, contract documents. You did good work documenting all this, Kelly. Is it enough? She asked. Carlos leaned back in his chair. Here's the truth. The Dawson brothers have a lot of influence in Redemption Creek. Mayor Anderson plays golf with them every Sunday. Half the city council works out of their pockets. Even the police chief over there, Jack Morrison. I've heard rumors about him taking payments from various businesses. So we can't do anything? Kelly's voice was defeated. I didn't say that, Carlos replied firmly. I said they have influence in Redemption Creek. But this kind of fraud, this amount of money, this crosses county lines. It's way bigger than one corrupt town. What we need to do is build a case so strong that their local connections don't matter. How do we do that? Tom asked. Carlos stood up and started pacing. First, we need to secure this evidence. I'm going to make copies and store them in different locations. Then we need to find other victims. The Dawson brothers have been operating for years. Kelly can't be the first person who's crossed them. There was a guy, Kelly said suddenly, about a year before I started working there. I heard people talking about him. Danny Williams. He was a construction worker on one of their sites. Got hurt in an accident, something about faulty equipment. He tried to sue, but the case got dropped. Then he just disappeared. Left town overnight, Carlos wrote the name down. I'll look into him. Anyone else? Kelly thought hard. There was a woman, Beth Carlson. She used to work in accounting before me. She quit suddenly, didn't even give notice. Someone said she moved back east to be with family, but I always thought it was weird how fast she left. I'll find them both, Carlos said. What about the men who attacked you? You said you recognized 2 of them from the company. Victor Hayes and Mike Torres, Kelly said, the names coming out like poison. They both work construction for Dawson. The third guy, the one who seemed to be in charge, I only know him as Ray. Big guy, tattoos on his arms, drives a black pickup truck. Ray Murdoch, Carlos said, nodding. I know him. He's got a record. Assault, intimidation, extortion. Did a few years in prison about a decade ago. Since then, he's been careful. Nothing we can prove, but everyone knows he's the Dawson brothers' muscle. Can we arrest them? Tom asked. Not yet, Carlos said. Right now, it's Kelly's word against theirs. No witnesses, no physical evidence linking them to the attack. They'll say they don't know her, that she's lying. We need more. So what do we do? Kelly asked, frustrated. Carlos sat back down, looking directly at her. We investigate quietly. No official reports yet, nothing that would tip them off. I'll track down Danny Williams and Beth Carlson, see if they'll talk. I'll dig into the Dawson brothers' financial records. Look for other irregularities. Tom, you know people around here. Talk to other ranchers, business owners. Find out if anyone else has had problems with Dawson Construction. I can do that, Tom agreed. Meanwhile, Kelly, you need to stay out of sight. If the Dawson brothers think you're still alive and talking, they'll come after you again. They'll come after all of us. Kelly nodded, though Tom could see the fear in her eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked quietly. Carlos dug into records, finding a pattern of complaints that had mysteriously disappeared. Construction projects with safety violations that were never prosecuted. Workers who'd been injured and then intimidated into silence. Tom talked to his neighbors and friends. Old Henry Mitchell, who'd hired Dawson Construction to build a new barn, told Tom the work had been shoddy and overpriced. When Henry complained, suddenly his property taxes were being audited. Barbara Chen, who ran the hardware store in the next town over, said the Dawson brothers had tried to force her to use their construction materials exclusively. When she refused, her store had been robbed 3 times in 2 months. The local police never found anyone. Every conversation added another piece to the puzzle. The Dawson brothers weren't just stealing money. They were running Redemption Creek like their own personal kingdom, crushing anyone who got in their way. Carlos finally tracked down Danny Williams in Oregon. It took 3 phone calls before Danny would even talk. His voice shook when he described the accident that broke his back. The equipment had been faulty. Everyone on the site knew it, but when Danny tried to report it, he was told to keep quiet. When he hired a lawyer, that's when Ray Murdoch showed up at his apartment. He didn't threaten me directly, Danny told Carlos over the phone. He just described in detail what could happen to my wife and my daughter, where they shopped, what school my daughter went to, what time my wife went jogging every morning. Then he said it would be a shame if something happened to them because I couldn't learn to let things go. Danny had dropped the lawsuit the next day and left town within a week. Beth Carlson was harder to find. She'd changed her name and moved to North Carolina. When Carlos finally reached her, she broke down crying. I found discrepancies in the accounts, she said, about $70,000 that couldn't be explained. I brought it to my supervisor, and the next day someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything, but they left a note on my bed. It said, "This is a warning." I was so scared I couldn't think straight. I quit the next morning and left town that night. Carlos recorded every conversation, documented every complaint, built a timeline that showed years of corruption and intimidation. Meanwhile, Tom noticed something. Twice he'd seen the same dark blue sedan driving slowly past his ranch. It never stopped, but it was there, watching. They know something's up, he told Carlos. Maybe they don't know Kelly's here specifically, but they're looking. Carlos looked grim. We need to move faster then. I've got enough now to bring in the state police and possibly the FBI. Financial fraud across state lines using violence to cover up crimes, this is federal territory. How long? Kelly asked. A few more days, Carlos said. I need to get everything organized, make sure the case is airtight before we move. The moment we file official charges, this all becomes public. We won't have the element of surprise anymore. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that blue sedan, about the Dawson brothers sitting in their fancy office believing they were untouchable, about Kelly's face when she'd whispered, "Just make it quick." He got up and found Kelly in the kitchen making tea. Can't sleep either? He asked. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that parking lot, she admitted. I keep thinking about what happens if this doesn't work, if they find a way to get away with it. Tom poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. My daughter Amy, she was being bullied at school. I didn't take it seriously enough. I thought kids just needed to work things out themselves. I told her to ignore it, to not make waves. Kelly listened quietly. She listened to me. She stayed quiet. And those kids, they kept pushing and pushing until there was nothing left of the bright, happy girl she used to be. By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, it was too late. I'm sorry, Kelly said softly. I made a choice to stay quiet when I should have fought. Amy paid the price for my cowardice. But you, Tom looked at her steadily. You didn't stay quiet. You documented everything. You tried to do the right thing. And even after they beat you and left you for dead, you survived. You are still fighting. I'm scared, Kelly whispered. Being scared doesn't make you weak, Tom said. It makes you human. But you're here. You're alive. And in a few days, we're going to make sure everyone knows what the Dawson brothers really are. Kelly managed a small smile. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on yourself, Tom replied. 2 days later, Carlos called. We're ready. I've briefed the state police and the FBI. They're interested, very interested. We're going to need Kelly's testimony, and she'll need to be prepared for what comes next. This is going to get intense. Tom looked at Kelly, who'd been listening on speakerphone. She took a deep breath and nodded. We're ready, Tom said into the phone. Let's bring them down. The first sign that things were about to get worse came on a Tuesday morning. Tom was feeding his horses when he noticed something was wrong. The fence along his eastern property line had been cut. Not damaged by weather or animals. Cut clean with wire cutters. He called Carlos immediately. They're testing you, the sheriff said, seeing how you'll react. Don't do anything yet. Just document it, take photos. I'm going to increase patrols in your area. But the fence was just the beginning. 2 days later, Tom drove into town for supplies and found his truck's tires slashed in the grocery store parking lot. The store's security cameras had mysteriously stopped working that morning. The manager apologized, but Tom could see the fear in his eyes. Word was spreading about Tom helping Kelly, and people were starting to distance themselves. Better be careful, Tom, old Bill Harrison said as Tom was loading his groceries. Dawson brothers aren't people you want to make enemies with. Is that a warning or a threat? Tom asked calmly. Bill looked uncomfortable. Just friendly advice. They've got long arms, those boys. Can reach pretty far when they want to. That night, Kelly was looking out the window when she suddenly gasped and ducked down. Tom, that blue car! It's back! And it's not driving by this time. It's parked at the end of your driveway. Tom looked out carefully. Sure enough, the same sedan was sitting there, engine running, just watching the house. He pulled out his phone and called Carlos, keeping his voice calm for Kelly's sake. We've got company. I'm sending a deputy. Don't engage with them. Just stay inside. The car stayed for 20 minutes before driving off slowly. The message was clear. We know you're there. We're watching. The next morning, things escalated further. Tom woke up to find graffiti sprayed across his barn. The words made his blood boil. Liars die. But worse than the graffiti was what he found near the house. Someone had scattered nails all across his driveway during the night. If Tom hadn't been looking down, he would have driven right over them. This is getting serious, Carlos said when he came to investigate. They're trying to intimidate you into backing down. It's not going to work, Tom said firmly. But Kelly was falling apart. She'd barely slept in days, jumping at every sound. Tom found her crying in the kitchen that afternoon. This is my fault, she said. I should have just kept my mouth shut. Now they're going to hurt you too, and it's all because of me. Stop that, Tom said gently but firmly. This isn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. They're the criminals. They're the ones who should be afraid, not us. But what if they... She was interrupted by the sound of gunshots. 3 loud cracks that sent them both diving to the floor. Tom's front window shattered, glass spraying everywhere. Stay down, Tom yelled, crawling toward Kelly to shield her. More shots rang out, hitting the side of the house. Then they heard a truck speeding away, tires squealing on the gravel road. Tom pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called 911. Carlos arrived within 15 minutes with 2 other deputies. They found bullet holes in the house and tire tracks leading away from the property. This is attempted murder, Carlos said, his face dark with anger. We can't wait anymore. We're moving forward with the case now. But that same day, something else happened that changed everything. The local newspaper in Redemption Creek ran a front-page story. The headline read, Former Dawson employee accused of theft, files false claims. The article claimed that Kelly had embezzled money from the company and was now making up stories about the Dawson brothers to cover her tracks. It cited anonymous sources and company documents that supposedly proved Kelly had stolen over $100,000. It's all lies, Kelly said, staring at the article in disbelief. I never took anything. How can they print this? The newspaper's editor is Mark Dawson's brother-in-law, Carlos explained grimly. They're trying to destroy your credibility before you can testify against them. The article had its desired effect. Tom started getting phone calls from people he'd known for years. Some were concerned, asking if he knew he was harboring a thief. Others were angry, telling him he'd been fooled. Even some of his friends seemed uncertain. The worst came when Tom's insurance agent called. Tom, I'm sorry, but I have to inform you that your policy is being reviewed. Given the recent incidents at your property and the allegations in the newspaper, the company has some concerns. Are you serious? Tom couldn't believe what he was hearing. Someone shot at my house and you're reviewing my insurance? It's not my decision, Tom. It comes from higher up. The Dawson brothers are major clients of ours. This is complicated. Tom hung up furious. They weren't just attacking Kelly's reputation. They were coming after his livelihood, his property, everything he'd worked for. That evening, Tom's neighbor Jim drove over. Tom and Jim had been friends for 20 years, helped each other through rough times, traded equipment, shared advice. Tom, can we talk? Jim asked, standing awkwardly on the porch. Sure, come on in. Jim shook his head. I'll stay out here. Look, Tom, you know I respect you. But the Dawson brothers' lawyer came by my place today. Started asking questions about you, about who visits your property. Said they're building a case against that woman you're hiding. Kelly didn't do anything wrong, Tom said. Maybe so, maybe not, Jim said. But the lawyer also mentioned that anyone who helps harbor a thief could be considered an accessory, could lose their property in a civil suit. Tom, I've got a family. I've got a mortgage. I can't afford to get involved in this. Tom felt like he'd been punched in the gut. So what are you saying? I'm saying I can't help you anymore. Can't lend you equipment. Can't be seen associating with you. I'm sorry, Tom, I really am. But I have to protect my family. After Jim left, Tom sat on his porch for a long time. The isolation was part of their strategy, he realized. Make everyone afraid to help. Cut Tom and Kelly off from support. Make them feel alone. Carlos called that night with more bad news. The prosecutor in Redemption Creek, Alan Stevens, he's refusing to file charges. Says there's insufficient evidence. I know for a fact he plays poker with the Dawson brothers every month. What about the FBI? Tom asked. They're interested, but they move slowly. They want to build a comprehensive case. That could take months. Meanwhile, the Dawson brothers are getting more aggressive. That night, Kelly and Tom sat in the living room with all the curtains closed. The bullet holes in the wall had been temporarily covered with plywood. Maybe I should just leave, Kelly said quietly. Disappear. Change my name, start over somewhere else. At least then they'd leave you alone. And let them win. Tom shook his head. No way. That's what they want. They want you scared and running. They want everyone who knows the truth to either run or stay quiet. But they're destroying your life, Kelly said, tears streaming down her face. Your friends won't talk to you. Your insurance company is abandoning you. Someone shot at your house. How much more can you take? Tom thought about Amy again. About how he'd failed to stand up for her when it mattered. About the years he'd spent wishing he could go back and do things differently. As much as it takes, he said finally, because running away doesn't solve anything. It just means they win, and I'm done letting bullies win. The next morning, Tom woke up to find another surprise. Someone had left a dead coyote on his porch with a note tied to its leg. Next time, it won't be an animal. But along with the dead animal, there was something else. An envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a letter from someone named Rita, who'd worked at Dawson Construction 5 years ago. She'd heard about Kelly through the grapevine and wanted to help. I know what they're capable of, the letter read. They threatened my family when I questioned some billing issues. I stayed quiet to protect my kids. But I kept copies of everything, just in case. If you're really going after them, I want to help. They've hurt too many people. Tom showed the letter to Carlos. We're not alone, the sheriff said. People are starting to realize they're stronger together than they are afraid. This is how we fight back. That afternoon, Tom taught Kelly how to shoot. They set up targets behind the barn. And he showed her how to hold the rifle, how to aim, how to stay calm under pressure. I don't want to shoot anyone, Kelly said, her hands shaking. Neither do I, Tom replied. But if someone comes onto this property meaning to hurt you, I want you to be able to protect yourself. Not because I think you'll have to, but because you deserve to feel safe. They practiced for hours. Slowly, Kelly's hands stopped shaking. Her shots got more accurate. Tom could see something changing in her. The fear was still there, but so was determination. As the sun set that evening, Tom looked at his property. The broken window, the graffiti, the tire tracks from the shooters, the bullet holes. The Dawson brothers thought they could scare him off. They thought money and threats and violence would make him back down. They were wrong. Let them come, Tom said quietly to himself. We're ready. Tom hadn't spoken to his brother Daniel in 15 years. Their falling out had been bitter, the kind that leaves scars. It started over their father's estate and ended with words that couldn't be taken back. Daniel had left Montana for Denver, becoming a journalist. Tom had stayed on the ranch. They'd both been too proud to reach out, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Tom stared at his phone for 10 minutes before finally dialing the number. His hand was actually shaking. When Daniel answered, there was a long silence. "Danny?" "It's Tom." Another silence. Then, "Tom, it's been a while." 15 years, 2 months, Tom said. "Look, I know we didn't part on good terms, and I know I said some things I shouldn't have, but I need your help. Someone else needs your help." Tom explained everything. Kelly, the Dawson brothers, the corruption, the threats, the violence. He talked for 20 minutes straight while Daniel listened without interrupting. When Tom finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Send me everything you have. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. I'll catch the first flight to Montana tomorrow morning." "Just like that?" Tom asked, surprised. "Tom, we're brothers. We had a stupid fight about money and pride. But you're calling me because someone hurt an innocent woman and you're trying to help her. Of course I'm coming. This is what I do. This is what matters." Tom felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you, Danny. Don't thank me yet. We've got work to do." Daniel arrived the next afternoon carrying 2 laptops and looking like he hadn't slept on the plane. He'd already started researching the Dawson brothers during the flight. "These guys are dirty," Daniel said, spreading out papers on Tom's dining room table. "I've been looking into their background. The Dawson brothers, Mark and Lucas, they've been sued 17 times in the past 12 years. Construction fraud, workplace injuries, contract violations. Every single case either settled out of court or disappeared." "How do cases just disappear?" Kelly asked. "Money and connections," Daniel replied. "They pay people off or they intimidate them. Sometimes both. But here's what's interesting. 3 years ago, a county commissioner named Helen Reed tried to investigate them. She was building a case for corruption charges. Then suddenly she resigned. Moved to Arizona. Wouldn't talk to anyone about why. Think you can find her?" Carlos asked. He'd come over when he heard Daniel was helping. "Already did," Daniel said with a slight smile. "Called her this morning. She's willing to talk, but only if we can guarantee she's protected. She's scared even after 3 years." Over the next few days, Daniel worked his network. As an investigative journalist, he had connections across the state and beyond. He started making calls, digging into records, following paper trails that led to more corruption. He discovered that the Dawson brothers had political connections that went higher than anyone realized. The state senator from their district had received significant campaign donations from Dawson Construction. So had the previous county prosecutor and several city council members. "This isn't just about money laundering," Daniel explained one evening. "This is about a systematic corruption network. They've been buying influence for over a decade, and nobody's been able to touch them because they've got protection at every level." But Daniel also found cracks in their armor. Disgruntled former employees, contractors who'd been cheated, other victims who'd been too afraid to speak up. The real surprise came when Tom's ex-wife showed up at the ranch. Patricia Jensen had been a corporate lawyer before she retired. She and Tom had divorced 10 years ago, not from fighting but from growing apart. They'd remained civil but distant. Tom opened the door to find her standing there with a briefcase. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" "I heard about what's happening," she said. "Jim's wife called me. Told me about Kelly, about the Dawson brothers, about the threats. I'm here to help." Tom was stunned. "But why?" "We haven't talked in years." Patricia stepped inside. "Because what's happening to this girl is wrong. Because someone needs to stand up to these people. And because—" She paused, looking around the familiar house. "Because I was in a similar situation once. When I worked at the firm in Billings, a senior partner was harassing women, including me. We all knew, but nobody said anything because he had power. Finally, one woman was brave enough to report him. She lost her job, her reputation was trashed, and she ended up leaving the state." "I never knew that," Tom said quietly. "I never told you. I was ashamed that I didn't stand up for her when it mattered. I stayed quiet to protect my career, but I've regretted it every day since." Patricia looked at Kelly, who'd come out of her room. "I won't stay quiet again." Patricia brought something valuable, legal expertise. She started reviewing the evidence, organizing it into a coherent case. She knew how to present information to prosecutors, how to make documents understandable to juries. "The financial records Kelly gathered are good," Patricia said. "But we need more. We need to show a pattern of behavior. We need testimony from multiple victims. We need to prove that the violence against Kelly wasn't an isolated incident, but part of their standard operating procedure. Daniel and Patricia worked together, reaching out to people across the state. Helen Reed, the former county commissioner, agreed to provide testimony about the threats she'd received. Rita, the woman who'd sent the letter, came forward with more documents showing fraudulent billing practices. Danny Williams, the construction worker who'd been injured and threatened, flew in from Oregon. He was terrified, but he was ready to tell his story. "I've been running for too long," Danny said. "My wife told me that if I didn't stand up now, I'd regret it forever. She's right. What they did to me, what they did to Kelly, it's evil. Someone has to stop them." Beth, the former accountant, was harder to convince. She'd built a new life in North Carolina and didn't want to look back. But when Daniel explained how many people had been hurt, how Kelly had nearly died, she finally agreed to provide a written statement. The momentum was building. More people were coming forward. The case was growing stronger. Tom watched it all unfold from his kitchen, amazed. A week ago, he and Kelly had felt isolated and alone. Now his dining room table was covered with evidence. His house was full of people determined to fight. And the Dawson brothers' empire was starting to show cracks. But the opposition wasn't sitting still either. The Dawson brothers' lawyer, a man named Richard Cross, started his own campaign. He filed a lawsuit against Kelly for defamation. He sent cease and desist letters to Daniel, threatening him with legal action if he published anything about his clients. He even tried to get a restraining order against Tom, claiming Tom was harassing Dawson construction employees. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks," Patricia explained. "It's a common intimidation tactic. Make everything so complicated and expensive that people give up." "We're not giving up," Tom said firmly. Carlos brought more news. "The FBI is officially involved now. They've opened an investigation into interstate fraud and racketeering. They're moving slowly, but they're moving. And with all the witnesses coming forward, they're taking this seriously." That weekend, Tom's neighbors started coming by. Not all of them, but some. People who'd been scared before were finding their courage. Old Henry Mitchell showed up with photos of the shoddy work Dawson Construction had done on his barn. "I kept these thinking maybe someday someone would listen. Guess today's that day." Barbara from the hardware store brought security footage from the robberies she'd experienced. "I always suspected the Dawson brothers were behind it, but I couldn't prove it. Maybe this will help." Even Jim, Tom's neighbor who'd distanced himself, came back. "I'm sorry," he said to Tom. "I was scared. But my wife pointed out that being scared is exactly what they want. If we all stand together, they can't intimidate all of us." Kelly watched all of this happening, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe people are doing this," she said to Tom. "All these people risking so much." "They're not doing it just for you," Tom said gently. "They're doing it because they're tired of being afraid. You gave them a reason to be brave." Daniel was working on his article, gathering quotes and organizing the story. "This is going to be big," he told Tom. "This isn't just a local corruption story. This is about how small-town bullies use money and violence to control entire communities. People need to know this is happening." Patricia was preparing legal documents, making sure everything was properly documented and admissible in court. "When this goes to trial," she said, "I want to make sure there's no way for them to wriggle out of it." One evening, Tom found himself standing outside with Daniel. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. "Thanks for coming," Tom said. "I know things between us were bad." Daniel shrugged. "We were both stubborn idiots. But you reached out when it mattered. That took guts." He looked at his brother. "You know, Dad would be proud of what you're doing. Standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. That's what he always taught us." Tom felt his throat tighten. "I should have done it sooner. With Amy." "You can't change the past," Daniel said. "But you're doing the right thing now. That counts for something." Inside the house, Kelly sat with Patricia going over testimony preparation. Carlos was on the phone with the FBI. 3 weeks after Daniel arrived, everything changed. He'd been working with a forensic accountant, tracing money trails through dozens of shell companies and fake contracts. The accountant, a woman named Jennifer Lee, had found something explosive. "You need to see this," Jennifer said, spreading documents across Tom's kitchen table. Everyone gathered around: Tom, Kelly, Daniel, Patricia, and Carlos. "The Dawson brothers haven't just been laundering money through fake construction contracts," Jennifer explained. "They've been doing it for other people too. I found connections to 3 different criminal organizations: drug money, illegal gambling profits, even funds from a human trafficking ring 2 states over. The Dawson brothers aren't just local crooks. They're part of a regional money laundering operation. Carlos whistled low. That's federal territory. Big-time federal. It gets better, Jennifer continued. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. I found payments going to county officials, state legislators, even a federal judge. We're talking about corruption at every level of government. How much money are we talking about? Tom asked. Over the past 7 years, approximately $18 million laundered through their construction business. Bribes totaling close to $2 million. This isn't small-time fraud. This is organized crime. Patricia looked at the documents, her lawyer's mind working. This changes everything. The FBI won't be able to ignore this. Neither will the state attorney general's office. There's something else, Daniel said. He pulled out a laptop and opened a video file. I've been digging into their past. Found this old county board meeting from 4 years ago. Watch what happens when Commissioner Reed tries to question a contract approval. They watched as Helen Reed stood up at the meeting, raising concerns about a Dawson construction contract that seemed overpriced. The board chairman, clearly uncomfortable, tried to move on quickly. But Reed persisted, pointing out irregularities. The video showed Mark Dawson sitting in the audience, his face darkening. After the meeting, the camera caught him following Reed out to the parking lot. The audio was faint, but Daniel had enhanced it. You're making a mistake, Commissioner, Mark's voice said. People who ask too many questions tend to have unfortunate accidents. Are you threatening me? Helen's voice was shaky but defiant. I'm giving you friendly advice. Drop this, or things get complicated for you and your family. 2 weeks later, Helen had resigned and left the state. That's witness intimidation on video, Carlos said, excitement in his voice. This is exactly what we needed. But Daniel had saved the most important discovery for last. I got a call yesterday, he said, from a woman named Grace Martinez. She works in the county clerk's office. She's been there for 20 years and she's seen everything. She's scared to death, but she's ready to talk. Grace arrived the next day, a nervous woman in her 50s who kept looking over her shoulder. Tom made her coffee while she gathered her courage. I've watched them corrupt my county for years, Grace said, her hands shaking around the coffee mug. They've bought off so many people. The county prosecutor, the former sheriff, 3 commissioners, the building inspector. Every time someone tried to investigate them, the documents would mysteriously disappear or get lost in the system. And you saw this happening? Patricia asked gently. Grace nodded. I was ordered to lose files, to accidentally misfile complaints, to delay paperwork for anyone investigating Dawson construction. At first I thought it was just incompetence. But then I realized it was deliberate. I was part of the cover-up and I hated myself for it. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Carlos asked, not unkindly. Because I was terrified, Grace admitted. My daughter has special needs. The medical bills are expensive. I couldn't afford to lose my job. And I saw what happened to people who crossed the Dawson brothers. Helen Reed was run out of town. Jack Morrison, the honest deputy who tried to investigate them, ended up fired on false charges. I have a family to protect. What changed? Tom asked. Grace looked at Kelly. I heard about what they did to you, how they beat you and left you to die, and I thought about my daughter. What if someone did that to her? Would I want people to stay silent? Would I want them to choose their job security over her life? She wiped tears from her eyes. I can't stay silent anymore. I have recordings. Secret recordings of phone conversations and meetings. I've been keeping them for years, just in case. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I kept them anyway. The recordings were damning. County officials discussing how to bury investigations. The Dawson brothers casually talking about bribing inspectors. Conversations about intimidating witnesses. Years of corruption, documented in the conspirators' own voices. This is it, Patricia said, reviewing the recordings with increasing excitement. This is what we needed. With these recordings, the financial documents, the witness testimony, and the video of Mark threatening Helen Reed, we have a case they can't escape from. Carlos immediately contacted the FBI. Within 2 hours, federal agents were at Tom's ranch reviewing everything. Agent Michelle Torres, a seasoned investigator who'd worked organized crime cases for 15 years, looked almost amazed at what they'd compiled. You've done our job for us, she said. This is one of the most complete corruption cases I've seen. How did civilians manage to put this together? Civilians who care, Tom said simply. Agent Torres nodded. Well, caring isn't always enough, but caring plus solid evidence? That changes everything. We're moving forward with this. Federal charges for money laundering, racketeering, corruption, witness intimidation, and assault. We're going after everyone involved. The Dawson brothers, their associates, the corrupt officials, everyone. That night, Kelly sat on Tom's porch, watching the stars. Tom joined her, bringing 2 cups of hot chocolate. It's really happening, isn't it? Kelly said quietly. They're actually going to be held accountable. Looks that way, Tom replied. Kelly was quiet for a long moment. I need to testify in person, not just give a statement. I need to stand up in court and tell everyone what they did to me. You sure about that? Tom asked. It's going to be hard. The defense will try to tear you apart. They'll bring up every mistake you've ever made, try to make you look bad. I know, Kelly said, and I'm terrified. But I keep thinking about all the people who've come forward to help me. Grace, who risked her career. Danny, who flew in from Oregon. Helen, who's still scared years later. All these people are being brave for me. The least I can do is be brave for them. Tom squeezed her shoulder. You've been brave from the beginning. Walking 12 miles with broken ribs? That's the kind of strength most people never have to find. I had to find it because I had no choice, Kelly said. But this? Testifying? That's a choice. And I want to make it. I want those brothers to see my face and know that they didn't break me. They tried to make me disappear, and instead, I'm going to be the reason they go to prison. Inside the house, Daniel was finishing his article. Patricia was preparing legal briefs. Carlos was coordinating with the FBI. Grace was organizing her recordings. All these pieces coming together, building toward justice. The next morning, Agent Torres called with news. We're ready to move. Tomorrow morning, we're executing arrest warrants for the Dawson brothers, Ray Murdoch, and 6 corrupt officials. We're also raiding their offices and homes. This is going to be big, and it's going to be public. Are your witnesses ready? They're ready, Tom confirmed. That evening, Tom gathered everyone in his living room. Kelly, Daniel, Patricia, Carlos, Grace, Danny, Rita, Helen on video call, and several others who'd contributed to building the case. Tomorrow morning, this all becomes real, Tom said. The FBI is moving. The Dawson brothers are going to be arrested. The story is going public. After tomorrow, nothing goes back to how it was before. He looked around the room at all these people who'd come together. I want to thank every one of you. A month ago, Kelly was alone and scared, thinking nobody would help her. Now look at this room. Look at what we've built together. We couldn't have done it without you, Tom, Helen said from the video screen. You gave us a reason to stop being afraid. No, Tom said, shaking his head. Kelly did that. She survived. She refused to give up. She gave all of us something to fight for. Kelly stood up, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe this is happening. A month ago, I was dying on the side of a road. I'd given up. I thought they'd won. And now? She looked around the room. Now I'm surrounded by people who care. People who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. She walked over to Tom. You promised me they'd pay for what they did. Everyone thought you were crazy. One rancher taking on a corrupt empire? But you meant it. You actually kept your promise. Tom pulled her into a hug. We all kept our promises. Every person in this room. That night, Kelly couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the next day, about seeing the Dawson brothers arrested, about justice finally coming. She thought about that night in the parking lot, about the beating, about crawling through the dark toward Tom's ranch. She'd whispered, just make it quick, because she'd given up hope. She'd believed the world was full of people who only looked out for themselves, who'd let evil win because it was easier than fighting. She'd been wrong. The arrests happened at dawn. FBI agents moved simultaneously on multiple locations across the county. The Dawson brothers were taken from their homes in handcuffs, their shocked faces captured by news cameras that Daniel had tipped off. Ray Murdoch tried to run but was caught 3 blocks from his apartment. The corrupt county prosecutor, the former sheriff, and 4 other officials were all arrested within 2 hours. By noon, it was the biggest story in Montana. By evening, it had gone national. Daniel's article, published that morning, provided the context and evidence that made everything clear. Social media exploded with reactions. Other victims started coming forward, people who'd been too scared to speak up before. The trial began 3 months later. The federal courthouse in Billings was packed every single day. News crews lined up outside. The case had become a symbol of something bigger, regular people standing up against corruption and winning. Tom sat in the front row every day, just as he'd promised Kelly. Patricia sat beside him, having come out of retirement to serve as a consultant on the prosecution team. Daniel was there with his notepad, documenting everything for his follow-up articles. The prosecution started strong. Agent Torres laid out the evidence methodically. Financial records showing $18 million in laundered money, the fake contracts, the shell companies, the paper trail of bribes to officials. This was an opportunistic crime, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Chen, told the jury. This was systematic corruption. For over a decade, the defendants built an empire of fraud and intimidation. They bought officials. They silenced witnesses. They used violence to maintain their power, and they believed they were untouchable. The defense attorney, Richard Cross, tried to paint a different picture. He claimed the Dawson brothers were successful businessmen being targeted by jealous competitors. He suggested Kelly and other witnesses had ulterior motives, that they were disgruntled former employees making up stories. But then the witnesses started testifying. Grace Martinez went first. She was terrified, her voice shaking, but she told the truth about years of being ordered to bury documents and lose files. She played some of her secret recordings. The jury's faces grew dark as they heard county officials casually discussing how to cover up investigations. "I hate what I did," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "I participated in the corruption because I was scared, but I can't carry that guilt anymore. These people hurt innocent individuals and I helped them get away with it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting she was making things up to get immunity for her own crimes. But the recordings spoke for themselves. Helen Reed testified next via video link from Arizona. She described the threats she'd received, the intimidation, the fear that had driven her from her home state. "I loved my job," Helen said. "I loved serving my community. But Mark Dawson made it clear that if I continued asking questions, my family would suffer." He described my daughter's routine, where she worked, what route she took home. The message was unmistakable. Back off or face consequences. They played the video Daniel had found showing Mark threatening Helen in the parking lot. The jury watched in silence as Mark's voice clearly said, "People who ask too many questions tend to have unfortunate accidents." Danny Williams flew in from Oregon to testify. He walked with a cane, his back still damaged from the accident that the Dawson brothers had caused. "They knew the equipment was faulty," Danny said. "Everyone on that job site knew. But the Dawsons didn't want to pay for repairs or replacements. So they kept using it or kept putting workers at risk. When I got hurt, when I tried to speak up, Ray Murdoch came to my home. He threatened my wife, my little girl. I had to choose between justice and keeping my family safe." Rita testified about the fraudulent billing practices she'd witnessed. Beth sent a video deposition from North Carolina, describing how she'd been terrorized into silence. One by one, victims told their stories. The defense tried to break each witness to find contradictions or ulterior motives. Richard Cross was good at his job, aggressive and thorough. But the witnesses held firm because they were telling the truth. Then it was Kelly's turn. Tom watched as she walked to the witness stand. She was nervous, he could see it in the way her hands trembled slightly. But she held her head high. She'd come a long way from the broken woman who'd collapsed near his barn. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Kelly Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell, can you tell the jury what happened on the night of March 15th? Kelly took a deep breath and began her story. She described working at Dawson Construction, finding the irregularities in the accounts, deciding to document everything. Her voice was steady as she talked about approaching her supervisor. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Kelly said. "I thought people would want to know about the fraud. I was naive." She described the attack in detail. The parking lot. The three men. The beating. Being thrown in the back of a truck and driven to a remote location. "They didn't just want to hurt me," Kelly said, her voice breaking slightly. "They wanted to make sure I understood what happens to people who cross the Dawson brothers. One of them, Ray Murdoch, he stood over me while I was on the ground. He said, 'Tell anyone about this and next time we'll make sure you don't wake up.'" Tom saw several jurors wipe their eyes. "How did you escape?" The prosecutor asked. I didn't escape, Kelly said. They left me there to die. Threw me out of the truck on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. It was dark, cold. I could barely move. But I knew if I stayed there I would die. So I started walking. How far did you walk? About 12 miles. It took all night. I kept passing out and waking up. Everything hurt. I thought about giving up so many times, but something kept me going. Maybe stubbornness, maybe anger, maybe just the will to survive. What happened when you reached Mr. Jensen's ranch? Kelly looked at Tom. I collapsed near his barn. When he found me, I thought he was going to finish what the others started. I was so broken, so defeated that I told him to just make it quick. I couldn't imagine anyone actually helping me. But he did help you. He saved my life, Kelly said simply. He kept me safe when I had nowhere else to go. He believed me when everyone else thought I was lying. He stood by me when it would have been so much easier to turn me away. Richard Cross stood up for cross-examination. He tried to paint Kelly as a disgruntled employee who'd been caught stealing and made up the whole story to cover her tracks. He brought up the newspaper articles, the accusations, the supposed evidence of theft. Kelly didn't flinch. Those documents were fabricated, she said calmly. The Dawson brothers created fake evidence to discredit me. They do that to everyone who threatens them. You can check the dates on those files. They were all created after I'd already been attacked, not before. Cross pushed harder, trying to find contradictions in her testimony. But Kelly had lived this nightmare. Every detail was burned into her memory. Isn't it true that you had access to company accounts? Cross asked. Yes, I was the bookkeeper. And isn't it true that someone with that access could easily embezzle money? Someone could, Kelly agreed. But I didn't. Every transaction I made is documented. Every penny can be accounted for. Unlike the Dawson brothers' fake contracts, which can't be accounted for because they never existed. Cross tried a different angle. You've been living with Mr. Jensen for months now. Isn't it possible you two have collaborated on this story? That you're both trying to profit from defaming my clients? Kelly looked directly at the jury. I'm not getting paid for this. Neither is Tom. We're here because what the Dawson brothers did was wrong. Because they've hurt dozens of people over the years and nobody stopped them. Because if we don't speak up now, they'll just keep doing it to other people. The cross-examination went on for hours. Cross tried everything, suggesting Kelly was mentally unstable, implying she had romantic motives, questioning every detail of her story. But Kelly held firm. Finally, it was over. Kelly stepped down from the witness stand, exhausted but unbroken. As she walked past the defense table, Mark Dawson stared at her with pure hatred. She stared right back, unflinching. The next week brought more damning evidence. Forensic accountants testified about the money trail. FBI agents explained the money laundering scheme. Technology experts verified that the recordings Grace had made were authentic and unaltered. The Dawson brothers' defense crumbled. They tried to blame everything on Ray Murdoch and low-level employees. They claimed they didn't know about the fake contracts, that they'd been deceived by their own staff. But the evidence was overwhelming. Their signatures on documents, their voices on recordings, their threats captured on video. The web of corruption they'd built over years was laid bare for everyone to see. The trial lasted 3 weeks. On the final day, both sides gave closing arguments. The defendants believed they were above the law, Prosecutor Chen told the jury. They believed money and power and intimidation would protect them. They believed that people like Kelly Mitchell and Grace Martinez and Danny Williams would be too scared to stand up. They were wrong. She pointed at the evidence table stacked high with documents. $18 million in laundered money, $2 million in bribes, years of fraud, dozens of victims. 6 months after the trial, Kelly stood in front of a newly renovated building in downtown Redemption Creek. The sign above the door read, Second Chance Advocacy Center. Tom stood beside her, along with Patricia, Daniel, and a small crowd of supporters. This is really happening, Kelly said, staring at the building that had once been an abandoned warehouse. You made it happen, Tom replied. He'd spent the last 3 months helping renovate the space along with volunteers from across the county. The same community that had once been too scared to speak up had rallied around Kelly's vision. The Advocacy Center was designed to help victims of workplace retaliation, violence, and intimidation. It would provide legal assistance, counseling, and a safe place for people who needed somewhere to turn when powerful people tried to silence them. Patricia had agreed to run the legal department, coming out of retirement for good this time. I spent too many years being comfortable, she'd said. Time to actually make a difference. Grace worked as the office manager, having quit her job at the corrupt county clerk's office. I'm done being part of the problem, she'd explained. Now I want to be part of the solution. Daniel had moved back to Montana, working as an independent journalist but also volunteering at the center. He and Tom had rebuilt their relationship, talking through old wounds and finding their way back to being brothers. The opening day brought more people than Kelly expected. Former victims of the Dawson brothers came to thank her. People from other towns who'd heard the story came looking for help with their own situations. Reporters came to document this next chapter. But the most meaningful visitor was a young woman named Rachel, who'd driven 200 miles from Wyoming. I worked for a construction company similar to the Dawsons, Rachel told Kelly. When I reported safety violations, they retaliated against me. Got me blacklisted in the industry. I lost my job, my apartment, almost lost everything. I saw your story on the news and thought maybe I don't have to just accept what happened. Kelly sat down with Rachel, listening to her story, taking notes, offering reassurance. Patricia joined them to discuss legal options. By the end of the meeting, Rachel was crying with relief. I thought I was alone, Rachel said. I thought nobody would believe me or care. Thank you for showing me that's not true. After Rachel left, Kelly stood at the window of her new office, watching the main street of Redemption Creek. The town had changed since the trial. The corrupt officials were gone, replaced by people who actually wanted to serve their community. New businesses had opened. People walked with their heads a little higher. Tom came in carrying 2 coffees. Busy first day? Overwhelming, Kelly admitted. There are so many people who need help. So many stories like mine. That's why this place matters, Tom said. You can't help everyone, but you can help some. And those people will help others. That's how change really happens. Kelly had become something of a local celebrity, though she didn't entirely like the attention. She'd been invited to speak at conferences about workplace safety and whistleblower protection. A victims' rights organization had given her an award. A movie producer had even called about her story, though Kelly had politely declined. I'm not doing this for attention, she told the producer. I'm doing it because nobody should have to go through what I went through alone. Tom had found his own purpose through all of this. The ranch was still his home, but now it served a larger function. It had become a temporary safe house for people who needed somewhere to go, while their cases were being investigated. He'd converted the old bunkhouse into a small apartment, providing refuge for those fleeing dangerous situations. His first guest after Kelly was a man named Robert, who'd been threatened by his employer after reporting environmental violations. Tom gave Robert a place to stay while lawyers built a case. Within 3 months, the employer was shut down and Robert had found new work. You saved my life, Robert had told Tom before leaving. Not just by giving me a place to stay, but by showing me that good people still exist. Doc Patterson stopped by the Advocacy Center on opening day, proud of what had grown from that morning when Tom had called him to treat a beaten woman he'd found near his barn. You know what amazes me? Doc said to Tom. You could have just called the police that morning and let them handle it. You could have stayed out of it completely. But you didn't. Neither did you, Tom pointed out. You came without asking questions. You treated her even when she didn't want to go to the hospital. Doc smiled. I guess we both learned something. That sometimes the right thing to do is whatever needs to be done, regardless of whether it's convenient or safe. Carlos stopped by in his sheriff's uniform. He'd been promoted to county sheriff after the previous sheriff's corruption conviction. His first acts in the new position were to clean house and rebuild trust with the community. The new county prosecutor wants to meet with you, Carlos told Kelly. She's working on several cases that might benefit from your testimony. People are coming forward now that they see justice is actually possible. I'll help however I can, Kelly said. That evening, everyone gathered at Tom's ranch for a celebration. It had become their tradition, these gatherings on Tom's porch as the sun set over the Montana hills. Kelly looked around at the faces that had become family. Tom, the rancher who'd saved her life and kept his impossible promise. Daniel, who'd exposed the truth to the world. Patricia, who'd found redemption by helping others find justice. Carlos, who'd proven that honest lawmen still existed. Grace, who'd found the courage to stand up after years of complicity. Doc Patterson, who'd healed bodies and spirits. Danny and Rita and Helen, who'd each found their own courage. "I've been thinking about that night," Kelly said. "When I collapsed near Tom's barn, I genuinely believed my life was over. I thought I'd used up all my strength just walking those 12 miles. I told Tom to just make it quick because I couldn't imagine anything getting better." She looked at Tom. "You saw my injuries and said they'd pay for what they did. At the time, I thought you were either crazy or lying to make me feel better. I couldn't imagine how one rancher could take on an entire criminal empire." "I wasn't one rancher," Tom said. "I had help from everyone here. From people who believed that doing the right thing mattered more than being safe." "That's my point," Kelly continued. "I was wrong about so many things that night. Wrong about giving up. Wrong about being alone. Wrong about justice being impossible. I thought the world was full of people who looked the other way, who chose comfort over courage." She raised her glass. "But I found out the world is also full of people like all of you. People who run toward trouble instead of away from it. People who keep promises even when it's hard. People who stand up for strangers because it's the right thing to do. Here's what I learned," Daniel added. "Family isn't just blood. It's people who show up when you need them. Tom and I didn't speak for 15 years because of pride and stubbornness. But when it mattered, when someone needed help, we remembered what family really means." Patricia nodded. "I spent years regretting that I didn't stand up for someone who needed help. I thought that chapter of my life was closed, that I'd just have to live with that guilt. But Kelly gave me a chance to do it right this time. To be the person I should have been back then." Grace was crying softly. "I was part of the problem for so long. I thought I didn't have a choice, that staying quiet was the only way to protect my family. But you all showed me that silence doesn't protect anyone. It just lets evil continue. The thing about bullies," Tom said, "is they count on people being isolated and scared. They pick off victims one at a time, making sure each person feels alone. But when people come together, when they support each other and refuse to be divided, bullies lose their power." Kelly smiled through her tears. "6 months ago I was broken and alone. Today I'm surrounded by family, running an organization that helps others, and I watch the people who tried to kill me go to prison. If someone had told me this would happen, I wouldn't have believed them." "That's because you didn't know Tom," Patricia said with a slight smile. "Once he makes a promise, he's like a dog with a bone. Completely stubborn and refuses to quit." Everyone laughed, including Tom. As the sun set completely and stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Kelly felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd found her purpose. She'd survived the worst thing she could imagine, and now she was using that experience to help others survive their own worst moments. The Dawson brothers were in prison, but their victims were free. The corrupt officials were behind bars, but the community they'd terrorized was rebuilding. The lies had been exposed and the truth had won. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect. There were still challenges ahead. More victims to help, more battles to fight, more bullies who thought they were untouchable. But Kelly wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. Tom looked at his brother, at the woman he'd once been married to, at the friends new and old who'd gathered on his porch. He thought about Amy, about how he'd failed to protect her, about the years of regret that had haunted him. He couldn't change the past. Couldn't bring Amy back, couldn't undo his mistakes.